I know for a fact I went to more Panthers games than 99% of you out there, so I don't want to hear how low I am on this team. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 28 team in my power rankings heading into the 2025 NFL season with a deep dive into the Carolina Panthers. I am pretty sure many are going to say that this ranking is too low for this team as we head into the start of the season, and believe me, nobody wants them to shatter this 28th ranking more than me, but I do think there are still some pretty low points on this team that we're going to hit on here today that can justify why this team still has a ways to go. But I do want to also just celebrate the fact that there are people out there thinking this is going to be too low of a ranking for the Panthers. After this point in last offseason, this team, this organization was really the laughingstock of the league. And the fact that we aren't sitting here with total doom and gloom as it relates to the quarterback room with Bryce Young or the coaching situation or perhaps even the ownership situation, I guess time will still tell on that one, but it is definitely a sign of good things to come. And we are going to talk about a lot of young, exciting areas of this team that could absolutely lead to this team shattering this 28th ranking, as I very much hope that they do. And it does serve as a nice reminder that these are just week one power rankings for this series, not necessarily how I would project them to finish in, say, week 18. But as we get started here, if you guys could do me a huge favor, if you've enjoyed this series, if you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to hit that like button down below. It really does help me out and supports my channel. And make sure you subscribe as well if you enjoy the deep dives. You're not going to want to miss any more coming your way. But let's get started, as always, by recapping the team's offseason, going through every position group and the coaching staff, discussing where they got better, where they got worse, where they may have stayed the same. And we start with the coaching room, and no change for the Carolina Panthers, so we can continue on and leave that neutral just the same with the quarterback room. They bring back Andy Dalton and are going forward with Bryce Young. But then at running back, some slight upgrades, in my opinion. They move on from Miles Sanders. What a bad contract that served to be for Carolina. And they bring in Rico Dowdle, maybe not quite as talented as your typical 1,000-yard rusher in today's NFL, but still better than Miles Sanders, in my opinion. I think the Cowboys are going to find that out for themselves this year. And then Trevor Etienne, the brother of Travis Etienne, gets brought in with a non-unsubstantial fourth-round draft pick there, a young back with some receiving chops, perhaps, so slightly upgraded with that running back room. At tight end as well, I just said slightly upgraded. They bring everybody back. Tommy Tremble on a small contract extension, and they draft Mitchell Evans out of Notre Dame in the 5th round. But then at wide receiver, yeah, they said goodbye to Deontay Johnson, who played for the first third of the season last year. Actually played pretty well for them last year, for what it's worth. Jonathan Mingo, they somehow get a 4th-round pick from Dallas for him, but they make the big pick at the top of the draft. T-Mac, Tet McMillan, with that 8th overall draft pick to come in and hopefully be this team's number 1 wide receiver. But then they also pluck Hunter Renfrow out of retirement / an extended time away from the NFL for his ulcerative colitis, where he had dropped a lot of weight. Now he's kind of back into playing shape. We'll get to see what he can do. And then Jimmy Horn Jr. as well, a 6th round pick out of Colorado. I am definitely saying upgraded with this group. Even without knowing what we'll get from Renfrow or Horn, I'm a huge T-Mac fan and think he can add to that group above what they got from Deontay Johnson and Mingo for the beginnings of last season. And then on the offensive line, staying neutral, but that is a good thing for this Panthers team. A very good offensive line in Carolina, perhaps the number 1 reason people will think that this team is ranked too low. But then you go to the defensive side of the ball, and they were much more active on this side of the ball, which makes a lot of sense. Essentially flipping the entire defensive line on its head and starting anew there, which is a good thing because this defensive line was XFL caliber last season, quite frankly. Some of the losses there, just to rip through the interior of the D-line and the edge guys like Deshaun Williams, Jonathan Harris, Charles Harris, Cam Gill, Among some other names that maybe got a start here, a start there, and then ended up back on the practice squad, lots of guys that were playing reps for this team last year, no longer with the team and kind of for good riddance. The one key loss along both of the defensive line groups is going to be Jadeveon Clowney, who did miss about the middle half of last year's season and then was pretty good down the stretch. So that is a loss. I don't fully understand why they released him, to be honest. I would like this team better. They would probably, frankly, rank higher with Jadeveon Clowney on this team. So wasn't a huge fan of that release. But if you look at the additions, I say that the interior of the defensive line is massively upgraded, while the edge group is slightly upgraded because they did lose Jadeveon Clowney. They got more room to make up there. But starting with that interior group, I mean, just alone getting Derek Brown back, who has a meniscus injury after week 1 and misses the rest of the season. He's one of the best defensive tackles in the entire NFL. And getting him back is a massive upgrade. Plenty of time to recover from that type of injury as well. So I think you're pretty optimistic to get him back in full force. So that alone is like kind of a massive upgrade. Frankly, they get their best football player back on this team that wasn't available for them last year. But then they go out in free agency and they add kind of a pass rushing interior player in Tershawn Wharton and more of a run defending first defensive tackle, Bobby Brown, to put next to Derek Brown there as well. So pretty damn major additions. And even getting a Cam Jackson, another interesting prospect in the 5th round. This interior defensive line really should not be the problem that it was for the Panthers last season. But then with the edge groups, you're really just counting on young players. As yes, they did bring in Patrick Jones in free agency on a 2-year, $15 million contract that I didn't really understand why he got paid that much, but kind of nailed day 2 of the draft, in my opinion, getting Nick Scorton. If my memory serves me right, they actually moved up a little bit to secure him, which was a great value at that spot. Big fan of that pick. And then Princely Umanmielen, who I think will probably have to play more of a pass rush specialist role in year 1, which we'll, of course, talk more about this defensive line later in the video. But they do get at least 2 interesting young bodies in there. They think Patrick Jones can play. I would say this would be neutral or even slightly downgraded had Jadeveon Clowney been available for the full season last year. But the fact that he only did play half of the year, it is enough for me to say that these young draft picks, they should be able to get at least a little bit more pressure out of that edge group than what they were working with last season. But again, one area I would be critical on this team is I wouldn't have been so quick to release Jadeveon Clowney unless he was really making noise that he wanted out. And I haven't heard that that's necessarily the case, but it is always possible behind the scenes. But then with the linebacker group, going to leave this neutral. Shaq Thompson, again, just unfortunately could not stay healthy last season. And they bring in Christian Roseboom, should be a backup here, unless something goes wrong, in which case he's not that great anyways. So pretty inconsequential with that linebacker group. Likewise, with the cornerback room, they bring Mike Jackson back, their starter on the outside, for a pretty cheap deal. They lose Dane Jackson and Troy Hill, who played just a little bit and did not play well when they were out there. So I figured they would add a little bit more to that group, and maybe they are players for Jalen Ramsey or Jair Alexander, by the way, which that would certainly boost this entire team ranking up if they made a move like that. But for now, saying neutral at the cornerback room. Then at safety, they spent big money on Trayvon Merrick after letting a pair of their starters go from last season, Xavier Woods and Jordan Fuller, some kind of older veterans there. I do say slightly upgraded, just getting a little more speed on the back end with someone like Merrick, and tackling security will be good for them. But I'm not ready to say that this is going to be a big upgrade in the safety group, with really just 4th round rookie Lathan Ransom that I wasn't that high on coming in to compete with a starting job. You are looking still for 2 starting safeties back there, and I don't know that they have necessarily found that second one. So I'm still saying slightly upgraded, but gonna have some questions to talk about, certainly with that secondary when we get to that portion of the video. And then with the special teams, I said hopefully upgraded. They're moving on from their veteran duo of Eddie Pinheiro and Johnny Hecker and going with kind of a quasi-veteran group. Sam Martin is an experienced punter that graded out better than Johnny Hecker last season. But then Matthew Wright kind of has bounced around the last couple of years, but kicked well last season in a couple different spots. So we'll see what he can do. They're optimistic that he might give them maybe a little bit more range as a kicker than someone like Eddie Pinheiro. But that does round out this Panthers offseason. I think for the most part, this is now back-to-back excellent off seasons for this Dan Morgan-led front office. I was really impressed with a lot of the stuff that they did last offseason, and I ranked them 30th last year when they were consensus the worst team in football heading into the year last year. Really saying, hey, I think this offense has a chance of figuring some stuff out as the season goes on because of a great offseason last year. That came to fruition, and now you're hoping some of the depth and just good value adds and good players that they were able to bring in really on both sides of the ball can help continue to build this team out of just the true gutter and into NFL competency, at least as a starting point, and hopefully beyond as well, of course. So definitely a shout out to Dan Morgan and that front office. I know a couple people there doing some really good work in Charlotte. And speaking of Charlotte, if any of you Panthers fans out there want to go out and try to capitalize on Panthers tickets still being pretty cheap before this team really turns things around, and you want to go to a game, buy your tickets on SeatGeek, who are sponsoring today's deep dive. I have proudly partnered with SeatGeek for years and years now, the number one ticketing app out there, the best app, the best user interface. They make things so easy for you by color coding every seat on that seat map there for you. So, just look for the green dots. You're getting the best bang for your buck. They'll give you a nice image of exactly what your seats are going to look like. You'll get your tickets right there in the app. You don't have to jump through email chains and different loops and apps to make sure you've got your tickets ready to go as you approach the gate. If you sign up using code TFG10, both new customers and existing customers can get up to $20 off your first purchase. That is code TFG10. And thank you, SeatGeek, for sponsoring the video. You guys have fun wherever you're headed, not just Panthers fans, concerts, baseball games, you name it, SeatGeek has you covered. But let's next talk about this Panthers coaching staff, how they are doing, how they stack up against the rest of the league with this group all together here heading into year two together under Dave Canales, the head coach. Really like what we saw from Canales in his first season. Now, I still have him ranked in sort of that cluster of coaches that do still need to prove themselves. We're talking about a team that won 5 games last season at the end of the day, but we did know heading into the year that he had a tall order to not just try to fix Bryce Young and get this offense to look competent, but kind of a locker room and a team that really just felt dead from the ownership down. There was just a lot of bad energy in this building. And I think just from a starting point, him coming in with just honestly just a lot of, from his perspective, like youth and enthusiasm, he is just such an energetic person, and I think that throughout the season really permeated throughout the team. And I think from a culture building perspective, he's created a lot of buy-in with this organization, and they're absolutely heading in the right direction, at least from that side of things. In fact, they have the 23rd to 26th coach and culture ranking for me, which is a very good step up from last offseason, where I'm pretty sure we would have had them 32nd. Certainly somewhere in the 30s. So I think all of the boxes in terms of leadership are checked with Canales, and kind of coming in and saving Bryce Young, giving him a real shot here as we head into year 3 to cement himself as the franchise quarterback that he was meant to be, going back to what he helped do with Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay the year before, and just kind of seeing not consistently throughout the entire course of the season, there were some ups and downs with this offense, but certainly coming in, scheming up some wide receivers, and having some games where this offense really took off, and had their defense not been really historically bad, they wouldn't have won only 5 games. So again, a young coach that is looking like a great hire that absolutely should be trending towards climbing these coach rankings. And I think coming off the heels of the Matt Rule and disastrous Frank Reich hires, just to feel like this team has their shit together under Dave Canales, and this front office as well. I know we don't do front office rankings in the course of this conversation, but that's just what a relief for Panthers fans to not feel like one of the laughing stocks of the league in that sense. But as far as what Dave Canale's scheme looks like here, this is very much in that Shanahan-McVay scheme style of offense, where it is a lot of under center play action, a heavy dose of the wide zone run game, and, you know, those play action shots with kind of double crossers where you're kind of high-lowing the safeties. One's on more of a medium crosser, one's on a deeper crosser, and you're just reading the leverage of the safety with plenty of protection off of play action where you got tight ends into block, and you're using those play fakes to get defensive linemen moving east and west instead of north and south. That was a big development for this passing game that helped them get better pass protection on top of investing in this offensive line and really getting guys like Bryce Young and even Andy Dalton time to push the ball downfield. So you definitely had all of the bones of your classic Shanahan style offenses. Dave Canales comes from more of the McVay branch, where he spent some good time under Shane Waldron, especially would seemingly be where his playbook and this play style really came along, because, you know, a lot of time they're in Seattle under Darrell Bevell and Brian Schottenheimer, some more classic pro style offenses as well. I do think those influences do kind of sneak their way into Dave Canale's play calling, though, and how he designs this offense. It's funny, it's just hitting me that Dave Canales actually reminds me a lot of Kevin Stefanski, who we recently talked about with the Browns deep dive, where he did actually spend essentially a decade in the same organization under a couple of different, more classic pro-style offensive minds. And yes, it was the Shanahan disciple, Shane Waldron, that eventually kind of really turned or converted Dave Canales into more of a Shanahan style, or the bones of his offense as a Shanahan style offense. And that's when things really took off for Canales as a head coach candidate, going through Tampa Bay, of course, first. But he does, like a Kevin Stefanski, have other roots and can kind of pick his spots from some of the other stuff he likes from older style offenses. So it's not just a wide zone run game in this Panthers offense. He does mix in different counters and crack toss and just straight up power where he's pulling the guards. Like he does have the ability to call a diverse run game, which is something that's really important to do as these defenses try to spread things out and have gotten more used to defending these Shanahan-style wide zone run games. So while last year was kind of the first year that Dave Canales has really had success in the run game, and the run game coaching is still has room to improve. They ranked 19th to 27th for offensive run game coaching. There are all of the bones for this to be a really advanced run game. And then from a pass game perspective, they rank a little bit higher there, a B- grade as opposed to the C+ grade for the run game coaching, but ranking 14th to 22nd for pass game coaching. I mean, how can you knock what Dave Canales has been able to do under Shane Waldron, but with Geno Smith in Seattle, then Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay, and now Bryce Young? Like, he is really becoming the quarterback savior in the NFL. And I do think he's able to use those Shanahan style play action concepts to make things easier on these quarterbacks. But likewise, I think he's does some good stuff in terms of the drop back passing game and picking from some of those more classic drop back concepts that I do think ultimately just can simplify things for the quarterback. Like a Shanahan drop back passing game is actually pretty damn difficult to understand. I think what coaches like Darrell Bevell and Brian Schottenheimer were trying to do were maybe less complex, but easier for a struggling quarterback to understand, to get through read one and read two and play efficiently. And I do see just, you know, a pretty nice drop back passing game from Dave Canales as well that really does a good job as well, just kind of like clearing out the safeties and finding openings for those dig routes that were a big part of Bryce Young's game. And this offense, just attacking the intermediate part of the field. And sometimes like just not overcomplicating it with, you know, proven throwback schemes that have worked for a long time is not a bad idea. But it's not that this is some dumbed down passing game either. It's a good balance. So I'm a full believer in Dave Canales. It's just a matter of him continuing to prove himself, continuing to climb these coaching ranks. And I absolutely would hope and expect that by the end of the season, he's not ranking as our 26th best head coach, but he does have still more to prove. But ultimately, no reason to doubt Dave Canales at this point in time. And then we don't really need to spend time with Brad Idzik here. He has been right next to Dave Canales there for quite some time. So, just kind of his left-hand man. But onto the defensive side of things, Ejiro Evero is still here, and I'm still really thankful for the Panthers and Panthers fans that David Tepper and this organization did kind of play hardball with Ejiro Evero. And we talked about this in last year's deep dive, but he is an asset for this Panthers team. And while the kind human thing to do would have been said, all right, you want out, you want to go explore other opportunities and go coach a more talented defense, fine, we'll let you go do interviews. The best thing that this Panthers team could do for themselves was to say, no, you're under contract. We're going to keep you as our defensive coordinator. And let's be honest, they went into the year knowing 2024 was all about fixing this offense. It basically converting defensive assets, things like Brian Burns and a lot of cap space, and just funneling it towards the offense, leaving that defense pretty bare bones. And then Derek Brown goes down week 1, and you can throw out last season for Ejiro Evero. Them being really a historically bad defense is not on him. But even as the year went on, as he started to get some of his veterans back, even just guys like Josie Jewell, Jadeveon Clowney, they were at least more of a practical defense, whereas the first half of the season, I mean, it was like going up against a practice squad every week, and I'm not just kidding. Like, the rosters they had to trot out were a list of names that me and you have just not really even heard of. So you can throw out the results from last season. I think it's natural for any fan to eventually want to see more from their defense when that type of season happens. I do believe it's coming with Evero. They've put more depth into this defense, more width into this defense as well. And I think patience is going to be rewarded here, not just from the Panthers side of things, but from Evero's side of things, where I haven't heard any noise that he isn't happy here and doesn't want to coach this defense, that there's bad blood or anything like that. It seems like they've kind of gotten through a rough season, and we can kind of get back on track with a young defensive coordinator that I do think the league looks at still pretty highly. It's just now we need to see those results to really come. I know a part of Evero wanting out was because he felt like he was on the cusp of getting a head coach opportunity. So, man, if he can do a good job with this defense, I do think that can come for him sooner rather than later. He did some really good stuff with those Denver defenses before coming to Carolina. And I think even if you go back to like 2023, again, a pretty bad roster that had a lot of injuries that year as well. And, they were like 25th defensive DVOA. So it's like he's been able to raise the boat in many situations, stop it from sinking. Now it's time to, put the sails back on, fix the rudder, and really get this thing moving. So I do believe in Ejiro Evero. I still have him ranking out pretty nicely, kind of smack dab in the middle of the league that is full of good defensive coaches with B grades across the board for both pass defense and run defense coaching, as high as 13th for pass defense and as high as 15th for run defense. As far as his scheme is concerned, he does come from the Vic Fangio background. Actually spent a lot of time with Vic in San Francisco, and then under Brandon Staley with the Rams, who was a Vic Fangio guy in 2020. But that's not his only influence. He did coach under a lot of these kind of fire zone, blitz, cover 3 style defenses like Wade Phillips and Dom Capers. And then he also spent some time under Raheem Morris, though they were running really the Brandon Staley system there with the Rams, but still a good influence to have worked with. I do think he is a versatile defensive coach, which at the end of the day really matters. I think he can adjust to his personnel, dial up good blitzes and confuse pass protections and kind of manufacture a pass rush out of nothing at times. And that's a big quality for a defensive coach as well. Something that I do think has been missing in a lot of the Vic Fangio disciples, guys like Brandon Staley and Joe Barry and Ed Donatel. Feels like their blitz designs just straight up aren't good and don't cause confusion, whereas I think Avero understands that side of scheming. But he also is a coach that has understood, look, we can't just come out in quarters all day and live in that world and play bend don't break defense and passive defense and let teams take everything underneath. He does play a lot of off zone, but the Panthers have been near the top of the league in cover 3 over the last 2 years. And a big part of that are those cover 3 fire zone blitzes as well. But they actually were damn near at the bottom of the league in cover 4 last year. But middle of the pack in cover 6. I think about 15% of their calls were cover 6. So he does like to show too high pre-snap. I wouldn't say he's full on Vic Fangio or even Mike McDonald's system where like pretty much every snap is a pre-snap covers 4 or cover 2 look. But he does like to show that split safety look pre-snap and then rotate those guys up and down after the snap. But in his case, the idea that the safeties might just stay there in that cover 4 or even cover 2 look as a threat to the offense, that's pretty much out the window, or at least it has been in Carolina. In his case, one of those safeties is almost always either rotating into a single high look for cover 3 or cover 1, where they do run a fair share of man coverage. When they can, when their corners are healthy and they have matchups to do it. But also having one of those safeties kind of screen back into sort of a half field cover 2 side of the cover 6. So that's sort of the coverage structure there. Up front, you're going to get a lot of base 2-4 and a decent amount of, I think, 5-1 penny fronts this year as well, which is a big staple of many Vic Fangio style defenses. But with the way that this defensive front is built as well, they damn well might base their defense out of a 5-1 front. Something certainly to keep in the back of your mind once we get to that defensive roster breakdown here. But that does conclude our coach and scheme conversation for the Panthers. Let's now begin our roster discussion, kicking things off with a encouraging, optimistic conversation about Bryce Young that I think we can have at this point in time, because last year we couldn't just sit here and be rainbows and butterflies and be all optimism. Now, I certainly am proud to say that I didn't give up on Bryce Young after year 1. I played the highlight reel. I even made a highlight cut-up mash of Star Wars with the Padme clip of Obi-Wan. There's still good in him. I still did think that there was a world to save Bryce Young, especially with the QB savior Dave Canales coming in. And honestly, the first couple weeks of last season looked like we could throw that Star Wars Panthers highlight mashup out the door, and this thing was over. He got benched. This offense looked like a disaster. Frankly, it looked like Dave Canales had no idea what he was doing in the first 2 weeks. It was weird. They came out and it was like third down was like an automatic bubble screen. They just had no confidence in the offense. They had no idea what it was that they wanted to do schematically, what was going to work for them. And they hand the keys over to Andy Dalton. And I want to give a huge shout out to Andy Dalton for playing a huge, underrated role in the turnaround of this Panthers team and organization. I've really said in these deep dives for years now that he gets way too much hate for what he is as one of the best backup quarterbacks in the entire league. And in a disastrous situation, week 3, right? They were able to hand the keys off to him, and he really just settled everything down. Someone that understands what passing concepts work for him, able to kind of implement that into the offense, run the show, come in really with nothing to lose. I mean, Bryce Young has everything to lose, right? It only started 18 games or whatever, former first-round pick, looking like a surefire bust in year 2. The pressure on him was too much. Andy Dalton comes in with no pressure at all, and he's able to just get everybody to take a deep breath, I think including Dave Canales as well, and just say, look, man, I've done this before, we can do it. And then once Andy settled in for 5 or 6 weeks, it was really bizarre. He gets in a car accident. I don't want to call it the hand of God that caused a car accident. Thankfully, I believe everybody was okay, but Dalton gets in a car wreck. He injures his hand, and seemingly right at the moment where maybe the Panthers needed to go back to Bryce Young, because it didn't really feel like they had any interest in doing that at that point in time, because Dalton was playing pretty well, but Bryce Young has to get a start against a really good Broncos defense in Denver, I think, and he was a completely changed man. He felt like the QB that was playing with nothing to lose, that had watched Andy Dalton operate this offense that they themselves figured out, again, what was working for them conceptually, as well as the run game that had come alive. But he steps in, and every criticism you would have had about Bryce Young kind of became a strength for him. From the moment he stepped back on the field, for one, just understanding the structure of the offense, throwing intermediate routes and out routes with anticipation, within that, understanding how to beat the blitz, where year one, Bryce Young's tape against the blitz was a nightmare. Most rookie quarterbacks struggle against the blitz, but Bryce Young against the blitz was, again, a nightmare. But really from that point, he came back against Denver. He understood how to throw those out routes, like with timing and anticipation, to get it out there against single coverage and give your receiver a chance. He started drifting back against the blitz and having confidence that his throws were going to be there. Recognizing it, getting the ball out early when he needs to. He was so much better against the blitz, which we had discussed as a massive thing he had to get better at, and he did. And then with that confidence to play in structure, to hang in there against the blitz, you saw him starting to push the ball downfield a little bit more, opening things up to a guy like Xavier Legette, who may or may not have caught the ball for him, but dropping some real dimes down the field as well. And then the confidence to get that pocket presence back. That was the real, elite superpower that Bryce Young did have coming out of Alabama. I put the pro comp on him was bite-sized Patrick Mahomes because of the way he can sense the rush and get out of pressure and have that feel for that space as the pocket just decomposes, the ability to find those escape lanes, to step up in the pocket and just have that kind of eye in the back of his head, preternatural feel for that pressure in the pocket. And he seemingly got that back, especially in the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. Some of the plays he made in that Eagles game and really just down the stretch in general, it felt like the Bryce Young that became the number one pick and was this really hyped up, QB prospect for years. The one that was the number one overall pick. So this creates a very big, interesting season for Bryce Young as we head into year 3. I really think he's one of the just more fascinating narratives to follow for the entire NFL this year. I don't think we can come in and just say, okay, Bryce Young is amazing now. He figured it all out. He's going to be a really good kind of top 10 QB, and the Panthers were absolutely right for taking him number 1 overall. Look, I'm a huge Bryce Young truther, and I want nothing more than for that to ultimately be the truth. But the reality is 3/4 of his time in the NFL now have been a disaster. But the most recent quarter has been extremely promising. He was, I would say, a top, just to play it safe, top 14 quarterback for the last 8 weeks of the last season that we saw from him. I think you look at any sort of metric in terms of big time throws, turnover worthy plays, passing yards, just team offense, whatever it might be. I think that's maybe even underselling what he did once he came back last year. So the upside is obviously there, but we have seen some downside from a guy that doesn't have a cannon arm, that has shown us that he can maybe get flustered, and maybe there are moments where he has to get on his tippy toes to see the middle of the field, though I think he has done some good stuff with his technique to improve upon that being a weakness for him. So it is really all optimism in terms of the arrow is pointing up. He has a real chance at coming in, playing at a high level, and of course, ultimately getting this Panthers team to climb up the rankings from where I have them right now heading into the season as our 28th team. And I would just say with Bryce Young, I'm not 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I would say I'm like 3 feet in, 1 foot out if I were a dog, maybe. I think it's a pretty fair place to be with Bryce, and that lands him for me as the 23rd quarterback ranking in the league right now for this series. And as a tier 4 kind of developmental quarterback, that the hope is he can get himself firmly into tier 3 this season, which is sort of your Jordan Love, Jared Goff tier. And I think he does have potential beyond that to be more of a tier 2 quarterback, which honestly, man, there was times last year where it felt like maybe he was even playing at that level as he got hot and the season went on. You know, if he had better weapons here, there was a lot of moments against big opponents, teams like the Eagles and the Chiefs, where his receivers were just straight up letting him down as he's making the biggest of throws in the biggest of spots. So I think that's a good transition now to talk about this Panthers group of weapons, our next position group here. And I was trying to say heading into this draft, like, look, I understand the defensive needs, but wide receiver is just as big of a need for this Panthers team as edge rusher or any other spot on this defense, because as well as Bryce played down the stretch, to count on what they had to be enough to help Bryce really reach the heights that they're still hoping he can reach as the former number 1 pick, and not just former number 1 pick, like they gave up everything to get Bryce Young. He needed more help. And I was so proud of Dan Morgan in this front office, where everybody, maybe outside of this channel, thought, yeah, they're going defense with that 8th overall pick. Jalen Walker was all we ever heard. But then T-Mac, Tet McMillan, for me, one of 4 true blue chip prospects in this draft class, falls into their lap off after, I think, true prospect fatigue struck not just the draft community, but the NFL world as well. T-Mac should have been a top 5 draft pick, in my opinion, for what he was as a prospect. Who was going to take him, whether it was New England, or if the Jags ended up picking at 5, or the Raiders, the Jets, any of those teams really should have firmly considered T-Mac. Luckily for the Panthers, they didn't, and they were able to get him. And I just love this fit as a whole, as a value, as a need, but beyond that, just as a skill set within this offense, with this quarterback and this play caller. Dave Canales himself had Mike Evans for that good year in Tampa Bay, had Mike Evans put up one of the best years of his entire career in 2023. Full stop. So to have that true X wide receiver that can run stop routes and, run the vertical route tree, he can run go balls. He's hit or miss in terms of like having the speed to stack corners on the outside. I do think he does some subtle stuff within his routes to set up corners for false steps, and he can actually run past you deep. He didn't get enough credit for that, but he is more often than not going to be covered by NFL corners. But he, to me, projects as immediately one of the best jump ball, contested catch receivers in the entire league with a massive frame. Not just that, though. He really does understand body positioning and push-offs at the catch point, and just he has that Justin Jefferson trait where when the ball is in the air, he's just going to find a way to catch it, whether it's a one-hand grab, contorting backwards, 360 no-scope catch, or just straight up jumping over a DB. Like, give this guy an opportunity. He's going to make you right more often than not. Something obviously Mike Evans has always done so well as well. But he's an underrated route runner in the sense of running dig routes and crossing routes, and extremely underrated after the catch, where only Luther Burden forced more missed tackles in 2024. He's got really light feet and is super shifty. Reminds me a lot of Drake London in the sense of he is a bigger wide receiver that can work from the slot and run quick routes and do a lot of shifty, savvy stuff that even a guy like Mike Evans can't. All of this together is why I had him as a true blue chip player in this draft. He was, I think, my 4th overall player behind just Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, Ashton Ginty, and then T-Mac. And I also got to say, man, Bryce Young showed us in the second half of last season, whether you're Adam Thielen, Xavier Legette, or frankly, Jalen Coker, David Moore, he made some really impressive kind of trust timing throws, whether it was on dig routes or corner routes or out routes that McMillan is really good at. So just putting the ball in the air, placing the ball, like just pure ball placement from Bryce Young, understanding where to put the ball, where only his guy can get it. And when that guy is T-Mac, like, God, there is a just assload of potential with this draft pick. I'm really excited to see it. So he gets a 79 grade for me coming in as a rookie. And, you know, it's just, that's our process with this series. We don't overshoot things with these rookies. If I did that with someone like Marvin Harrison last year and came in and ranking him at his ceiling, we would have been even more disappointed with a down rookie season, even though it was a good rookie season for Marv. There's a reason we do things this way. It's a big reason why the Panthers overall still rank with just a C+ grade, ranking 27th to 29th for weaponry right now for week 1. But dude, if this thing all clicks, McMillan could be a top 10 wide receiver sooner rather than later, and this ranking is going to look really stupid looking back on it, hopefully in 5-6 months, right? But they do still have to come out and prove it and get the job done in that sense. As does, frankly, Xavier Legette. He's another contributor to this narrative of like, okay, there's a lot of upside here, but go get it done. Go do the thing. And with Xavier Legette, he's just got to go do the thing, and that is go hit the jugs machine for 2 hours a day and remember how to catch. Because for a former first-round pick last year, someone with, you know, at 6'1", 220 something pounds, blazing speed, just an exceptional athlete with great play strength. I actually was really impressed by his routes on tape last year. I think the way he could snap off corner routes, and not just that, but play really physical through the route, which is really important. Any wide receiver has to understand hand fighting and push-offs. And the fact that this isn't college and you can't just run around these DBs anymore. Like, they are going to get in your face, and it's not going to be called pass interference. You have to play physical through that contact. He impressed me in that sense for a rookie. Hell, I think with what he showed, he could teach T-Mac a thing or two with some of those routes, being a little bit more physical at times. But, dude, just catch the ball. Like, he let Bryce down in some, just the biggest of moments last year. And he feels right now like one of these vertical threats that you can, you know, he might be wide open on a post or a go ball, but is the ball going to end up in his hands? And if he can correct that, I think now as a true Z wide receiver within this offense that's going to design a ton of vertical shots off of play action, getting Legette going on posts and deep crossing routes, which are still what he does best, as the complement to McMillan, and then just really running that sort of DK Metcalf Z wide receiver route tree. It's funny, you know, depending who you ask, they might call DK Metcalf the X, but you look at his route tree and it's like, no, that's a flanker. He runs go balls, posts, slants, and stop routes and hitches, and that's really all you really want Xavier Legette to have to run. The fact that he doesn't have to step up and be the true X and run a lot of tough digs and the whole X wide receiver route tree, it's really nice to be able to take that off his plate, focus on what he did great at South Carolina, what I think he can do great in the NFL, and maybe buy him a little bit of extra practice time to just hit the jugs machine. Simplify things, play fast, catch the football, and this could be an extremely dynamic, complementary duo of just rare physical talents. If you're worried about T-Mac not having the true speed to always take the top off the defense, Well, there you go. You got Xavier Legette right next to him, which his size-speed combination is what got him drafted in the first round to begin with. But I will pump the brakes a little bit and just point out, like, look, Xavier Legette is going to be one of the lower-ranking wide receiver 2s out the gate as we head into the season until he can prove that he's got the hands to be a starting wide receiver in the NFL. Now, fortunately, talk about hands, you do have Adam Thielen still here. And man, he missed some time last year. He's obviously getting up there in age. He's not quite the separator that he once was, though he's still a savvy route runner. Really does a good job setting guys up with, nuanced footwork and all that. But Adam Thielen, he was the guy that made clutch catches for Bryce Young on 3rd, 4th downs when the blitz would come. Bryce knew that Thielen was going to get to his spot on those corner routes and those out routes, and he would put it out there. And man, Adam Thielen can still find a way to catch a football, dude, and that's always been his biggest strength. Talk about that Justin Jefferson trait. Those Vikings wide receivers know how to do it, but Adam Thielen was another guy where it's like, just put the ball in his area. He will somehow find a way to catch that ball, and Thielen still has that trait to him. He's in a good spot, too, now, with T-Mac coming in, kind of pushing all these guys down the ladder a little bit where, okay, yeah, Thielen as a just complimentary slot wide receiver that can frankly even rotate on and off the field with some of these other guys, but be that veteran in the locker room for these young wide receivers and be that trusted, guy in this offense for Bryce Young. He's going to be an asset for this team this year. I do believe that. Now, with that said, this is actually a really deep group of weapons, even if, the top still has a lot of proving to do of this group. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be just Adam Thielen out there. And frankly, it's not going to be just Xavier Legette. They're going to work in Jalen Coker, who was, we had him pinged as one of the best undrafted pickups last offseason, and he very much proved that out. Jesus, the damn write-up on my draft board for him had shades of Adam Thielen written down, and he comes in and Thielen misses some time and Coker steps right into that role of like possession wide receiver. He can play outside, he can play inside. He's got savvy route running, but he's not the fastest guy. But put the ball in his area and he's going to come down with it. He came down with 5 out of 8 contested catches last year. Jalen Coker put up 478 yards and 2 touchdowns last year. Look, I'm not saying the Panthers have any interest in doing this because of all the good things we said about Adam Thielen, but it's not crazy to think that if Coker looks awesome in camp, that this team might see if someone's interested in Adam Thielen because Coker can play that role. We saw that last year. He is younger and has potentially more of a future as this team's wide receiver 3, but it's not just Jalen Coker. Damn, dude, David Moore deserves a shout out. He played really well for this team last year. Really just a half a season because he didn't really play when Deontay Johnson and Mingo were here. But once those guys were out the door, second half of the year, he puts up 350 yards and 3 touchdowns for a kind of wide receiver 3B. He produced and came up in the clutch in some big spots. Now, he's never been the model of consistency for anybody, but as a wide receiver 4 in this room, I think they bring him back for a reason. They expect him to make this team and provide good depth. So we're already running 5 deep, and there's still fascinating names here. They spend the 6th round pick on Jimmy Horn. Fully expect them to want to keep him around, at least as a return man early, but someone that got kind of underutilized in a deep group of wide receivers at Colorado. Really shifty route runner from the slot that can do some fun stuff after the catch. Didn't have drop issues or anything like that. It really was just, he only got 53 targets last year because you had kind of 4 sort of NFL caliber wide receivers in that offense. Not to mention, I do believe he got injured down the stretch for them as well. So a fun 6th round pick with potential as well to kind of break through as a potential future slot. And Jimmy Horn's absolute upside is as the perfect kind of slot weapon next to T-Mac and Xavier Legette, kind of in the, I would say like Josh Downs would be like kind of the best case scenario for Jimmy Horn. Obviously high praise, But a fun pick, and we'll kind of see where that goes. I just don't think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for him to play on offense this season. But that point is also very much going to be contingent on what sort of shape Hunter Renfrow is in. This was a signing that really caught my eye and kind of has me excited, man. I mean, I loved Hunter Renfrow when he was healthy for the Raiders in his prime. Like third and Renfrow, right? Like that was really becoming a thing kind of pre-Amon-Ra St. Brown. Hunter Renfrow was in the debate for who the best slot wide receiver in the league is, like true slot wide receiver. And then he gets this ulcerative colitis, which I'm not going to pretend I know too much about it, but he just kind of mysteriously vanished from the NFL picture really out of nowhere. Like it was a story of the decade is just kind of like, what the hell happened? Like, what happened with Hunter Renfrow? Where did he go? So he just vanishes from the NFL picture, and now he's back. The story is he's back in shape. He lost a bunch of weight because of ulcerative colitis, and he's conquered it, and he's back in NFL shape. And he is a little bit older now, right? 29 years old, but without those 3 years of NFL wear and tear on his body, it's certainly not like some 33-year-old trying to make a comeback. Like, there's absolutely a world where Hunter Renfrow kicks ass in camp, looks like his old self. And if that happens, that's where I do kind of think they might listen to Adam Thielen trade offers. Does Minnesota want to bring him back or something like that? Because I do think, you kind of have your go get it, trust throw guys in T-Mac and hopefully Xavier Legette, but even Jalen Coker as well. Renfrow to me is someone that can be much more of a separator, running two-way goes and finding space in zone to work. Not that Thielen can't attack zone coverage, but Renfrow just a little more speed from the slot and separation ability compared to where Thielen's at this stage in his career. So, like, I don't even know what kind of rating to put on Hunter Renfrow. I have no idea what kind of shape he's in, if he even makes this team. But obviously, like, the last time he was healthy on the Raiders, he was something like an 80 rating. Like, he was one of the best slot wide receivers in the league. So, fascinating, right? We'll see. Certainly a fun gamble for this front office to make. And then, dude, I got to shout out Kobe Hudson. He made my initial top 15 wide receiver rankings. He ended up slipping down a little bit as the draft process went on, but I think he still was inside my top 20 wide receivers with an early day 3 grade. I really think he was one of the better route runners in this draft class. He's got a great release. He made spectacular catches. He just is another guy that, like, focus drops plagued him, and he's got to improve his hands. But, I don't expect him to make the team initially, but I do think there's talent there for him to, maybe be like a wide receiver 3 type of guy someday, something like, Romeo Doubs-esque player who can separate and make tough catches, but, has drop issues. But yeah, that really is all the wide receivers worth talking about, which is a lot of them here. But then you do still have like a pretty long list of conversations to have with the tight ends and the running backs. So with the tight end group, I fully expect a rotation of starters here. But Tommy Tremble is the de facto starter. I think the guy that probably edges out Jatavion Sanders in snaps, though that's not a guarantee. But Tremble's just a really weird player to talk about because he's a blocking tight end that plays at probably 6'4", 245. They list him at 250, I think, but I don't quite buy it. He was undersized coming out and still, to me, feels a little bit on the slender side, but he does block his absolute ass off, and they gave him a contract extension for that reason. He's really athletic as a move blocker as well, so like coming cross formation, or hell, if you want to just use him as your fullback, he's really good at that role as well. And because he's such a good blocker, they pay him a decent chunk of money. It was like up to $8 million a year on the extension, but he's gonna get a lot of passing downs snaps for this team because you don't want it to be a complete tell that, okay, Tommy Tremble's in the game, therefore it's a run. And as a receiving threat, he's a really strange player to analyze because he's a good athlete. He has speed. He doesn't have drop issues. He has no drops on 59 targets over the last 2 seasons. He wins contested catches when he gets those opportunities. Like, he's actually converted, 9 out of 11 contested catch targets over the last couple of years. You see some high-end plays after the catch because he is athletic, yet he's never had more than 234 yards in a season in 4 years, 782 career receiving yards in 4 years, and has never been able to emerge as a productive player. Like, he's a tough guy to really locate what's missing, but it's even more frustrating because you go back to college and that was the same case. And this is now, like, going back to his time at Notre Dame, this is like year 6 of asking, is anything more going to come from him in the receiving game? And it really just feels like banking on that is a lost cause. Yet you go through everything I just said and you still kind of talk yourself into some theoretical upside there. But, you know, either way, not counting on much from him in the receiving game, but he is going to play a lot because they did extend him and he is their best run blocker. But then you have Ja'Tavion Sanders, who he showed more in a half a season as a receiving threat, honestly, than Tommy Tremble has in his 4 years. And he's kind of the opposite, right? Like, very similar builds, about 6'4", 245. But Sanders, like, you just watch him play and you're like, yeah, that's a savvy route runner. Like, he understands what to do at the catch point and how to win leverage. And just, he came down with some sensational catches last year. That was really what I loved about him coming out of Texas, was like, yeah, I mean, he's not the greatest athlete. He's not that big for a tight end. He's, you know, still has a long way to go as a blocker, but he just understands how to catch the damn football and how to produce as a receiving target. And I think it's very fair to kind of have the hope that he will kind of overtake Tommy Tremble, I don't know, this season or kind of into next season. Like, my pro comp on Sanders has always been something like Zach Ertz. And I think that's a fun projection for him as an upside look. But there were some drops on tape last year. He dropped 4 passes on just 43 targets, which was very uncharacteristic of him at Texas. And then he had, just as he was really getting rolling, he had a really scary neck injury. And he did, fortunately, bounce back, get back out there. But it does feel like he kind of has to go back now and recapture that momentum for this starting job. Basically what I'm getting at is I really like Ja'Tavion Sanders as a prospect, but I don't know that this is the year that I'm ready for the Ja'Tavion Sanders breakout. If I had to bet on it, I would say 2026, he emerges as a difference-making, consistent weapon for this team, whereas I think it's probably going to be more of a season of seeing that in flashes with Tommy Tremble still hanging around here. And that's why, like, a part of me kind of wanted them to just let Tommy Tremble walk and just give the year to Ja'Tavion Sanders. But I understand, like, he really is not that good of a blocker, and this was a good run game last year, and they don't want to lose that. So it's kind of hand in hand. So it's just where they're at. It's kind of a muddy, interesting tight end room that doesn't add too much to this group in the sense of impact weaponry. And then you also have Mitchell Evans, a 5th-round pick, another Notre Dame tight end here. And he's another guy that we have to discuss because he, to me, brings more of the full-sized potential inline tight end to this room. Like, I know they list Tommy Tremble at 6'4", 250. I don't really buy it. Looks more like the 240 he was coming out of Notre Dame to me, maybe in the middle there at 245. But Mitchell Evans is like a legit 6'5", damn near 260 pounds. Really showed at Notre Dame he can stick his hand in the dirt and dig out defensive ends. Inconsistent with his technique and had some times where he'd fall off blocks and still has room to grow as a blocker. But from a size perspective, much more of what you're looking for in kind of an inline blocking featured player like they have in Tommy Tremble, who does it, like, even though he tries super hard as a run blocker, there's times where he just doesn't have the mass to move some of the guys that they ask him to block. So for that reason, he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. But also, like, Mitchell Evans himself has an interesting narrative as a receiving threat. He, in 2023, was really kind of emerging as kind of potentially the next Notre Dame tight end. There's obviously just a long line of these guys, Tommy Tremble included. But he suffered an injury. I think it was an ACL, in that middle of that 2023 season, just as he was breaking through. And then it took him really towards the end of last season to really get back involved and be featured. And he was an impact for that Notre Dame offense that obviously went on a threat for a national championship run. So he has real potential to be a sleeper pick in the 5th round. And I think as you look all the way out into the future, like, if Sanders is going to be kind of this Zach Ertz-y half slot wide receiver, half tight end, and you still want more of a full-size inline blocker, there's a world where Mitchell Evans is that guy, and it's a rotation of Sanders and Mitchell Evans in the future. So that, to me, is the highest upside for this tight end room, is those two guys right there. Yet right now, we have Tommy Tremble kind of bottlenecking them right now because he is the best blocker out of the 3 of them currently. Only time will tell how this will play out, how much of a contribution they can get from this tight end room, and if it can become a good tight end room, whereas right now it really is still one of the worst in the league, if we're being realistic about it, as fun as Jatavion Sanders is as a prospect. Obviously, this contributes to this narrative of potential's there. Let's see where it goes. And then at running back, Chuba Hubbard's still going to be the primary 3rd down guy for them because I think he's an awesome pass blocker and they love that. And for the most part, he can catch your dump downs and do the screen game. And, you can get the minimum out of Chuba in the receiving game. But I do believe the Trevor Etienne pick was intentional to maybe give this backfield a little bit of shiftiness and route running chops and, have a back that can come out of the backfield and run angle routes and two-way goes and be a really explosive out in space player. Etienne had his issues in terms of being undersized and having consistent vision as a running back, but I do really like his route running and potential in that phase. In fact, he reminded me a lot of how I felt about James Cook coming out of Georgia. Now, he's got a long way to go to be James Cook. James Cook has done just a fully commendable job at becoming a more powerful runner and running with better vision. Obviously, if that happens, that's a dream, but at least being an impact in the receiving game, you could very well get something from Etienne as early as this season, depending what sort of plans they have for him. So he absolutely is someone that could get in the mix here and be something of an impact out of the backfield. But at the same time, I think Rico Dowdle plays as well when Chuba gets a bunch of carries and it's later in a drive and Chuba's gassed. Rico Dowdle can pass protect and kind of do a lot of the same stuff Chuba can in the receiving game. So it's going to be a big rotation on 3rd down. I think we see a lot of these guys. And unless Etienne as a 4th round pick just blows away expectations, which shouldn't be too high, between the running backs and the tight ends, it's like, yeah, you're not going to factor these guys into like boosting up this group of weapons all that much, at least right now, as we head into the season. Though, again, the potential is there for them to prove to be a really nice backfield in the receiving game. At the end of the day, I don't want to just keep repeating the same words, but the narrative is very straightforward with this group. Young group, really a nice just group of complementary weapons and a lot of depth. Everybody can kind of have their role here that makes sense. Now it's just a matter of, all right, let's go get it done. Let's shatter this 27th to 29th ranking for the group of weapons and go win some football games, right? And I think that's a good place to leave this group of weapons and now turn the page to this backfield with this running back room that is much more of a proven group. I have the Panthers ranking 13th to 18th in the league with a B grade. Very, very steady here. Certainly not the most dynamic, explosive backfield here with Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle, but reliable. And I will go back to that word, proven. And in the case of Chuba Hubbard, you know, I don't want to just say he isn't explosive. It's just when you're looking at top 10 running backs in the league, there's some pretty rare air there, right, to get up into that group. And he doesn't quite have the speed or agility of some of those top 10 running backs, but I do think he's knocking on the door of being a top 10 running back. And last season, in the framework of last season, once you peel a couple guys out of that top 10 for injuries, Chuba was a top 10 running back last season. Now we've got him more, just knocking on the door about 13th or so. Still really good praise for where Chuba's been in his career, and really excited for him that he gets the contract here. And obviously this comes at really the tragic cost of Jonathan Brooks as a second-round draft pick. But for Chuba, man, I mean, he is absolutely making a name for himself as one of the best players on this Panthers team, an absolute leader in that locker room and a face of the franchise at this point. That was why they, at the end of the day, felt they had to pay him, because things were just so ugly in Carolina that you kind of had to reward the guys that were putting in the time and setting an example in that locker room. That was ultimately bigger than the paying running backs conversation. And then with the Jonathan Brooks injury coming right back around the corner, not long after that contract extension, the Panthers all of a sudden were very, very happy to have Chuba for the long haul. But on the field, I mean, he's got exceptional vision. He can run with patience, but he also knows when to bounce runs outside. He's got that feel. He might not have exceptional speed or like foot quickness, but he does have really good burst into the hole. And when he's bouncing runs outside, he can kind of break some of those angles from linebackers and win that corner. But with that burst, with good size, with exceptional toughness, he runs through arm tackles. He feels like he runs pissed off. He runs like a leader of the team that is playing with a chip on his shoulder even after he got his contract. So he has absolutely taken over this backfield. He is going to be, in my opinion, one of the workhorse backs in the league. I think the Panthers are one of these teams that, like, they want to run the ball. They want to come out and, if the game script allows it, a successful day for the Panthers in their mind is damn near 20 carries for Chuba Hubbard, and I don't expect that to change. So I think even with less pressure on him, with things hopefully opening up in the passing game even further this season, a similar offensive line, like, I fully expect, if you want to talk fantasy football, I expect an RB1 finish from Chuba Hubbard. I really do. Not the number one running back, but in a 12-man league, I think he can, from a production standpoint, be in the top 12 of your fantasy football rankings. He had 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns last year. I think that comes up a little bit. I think we get maybe 1,250 and 11 or 12 touchdowns. And hell, he even had 4 fumbles last season that I think he can clean up. So big fan of Chuba Hubbard, and really no criticisms on him outside of, all right, you compare him to top 10 running backs. Maybe he isn't like the most explosive guy. He was, 17th in PFF breakaway percentage last year. I think that's about right. Like, it's not that he isn't explosive and doesn't have big runs. He just doesn't have that last extra gear to be this elite running back maybe, but he is absolutely a certified starter and a stud for this Panthers backfield. And then they bring in Rico Dowdle. This was a very logical signing for me, because even though I expect them to tote the rock with Chuba, you do need a backup if he is to get hurt. Any running back is subject to injury. It's just the nature of the position. But, Chuba's going to need a breather at some point, especially with how hard he runs. And Rico Dowdle makes a ton of sense as a backup. He's very Chuba Hubbard-esque, frankly. I think Hubbard has more burst and ability to make defenders miss, but in the sense of really good vision, gets what's blocked up for him, tough dude, and just kind of a proven stable backup now for the Panthers. Yeah, he ran for 1,000 yards for the worst backfield in the league last year, frankly, in Dallas, that did have pretty solid run blocking. I don't watch Rico Dowdle's tape and say he's really a good running back or there's a ton to get excited about with him. I do think Dallas let him go for a reason. They wanted a little bit more juice there. But he makes sense here in that, all right, if Chuba just carried the ball 5 times on a drive, he needs a rest, we can put Rico Dowdle in. Or if you want to just give Rico Dowdle like maybe one drive throughout the course of a game to keep Chuba fresh, that would make a ton of sense too. And at no point do you really have to change what you want to do schematically speaking, because Dowdle can do everything Chuba does. It's just turned down a knob in terms of acceleration and explosiveness, really. And as far as guys getting touches, I think it's going to be these two guys. I would anticipate, like, unless they both get hurt, like 95% of the touches, if not more, should go to those two players, and probably 80-something% to Chuba. These other guys here aren't really going to be factors in the run game. Trevor Etienne, we talked about him. I think they targeted him as more of an explosive third down option for them, but he might get brought in for some, third down draws to maybe get some burst up the middle against a light front, or maybe some specialized looks for, tosses and wide zone runs, just to kind of really tap into that speed that he has. So he's probably going to get mixed in a touch here, a touch there, but for the most part, again, not going to be toting the rock a whole lot. I don't even know if Blackshear will make the team now that they got ETN in the draft. Kind of the same idea there with less juice. You got a couple of undrafted types, and then really, I do think this sets up nice for Jonathan Brooks. Rico Dowdle's contract was a 1-year deal, and that was really perfect, because I don't think this team wants to just give up on Jonathan Brooks, their second-round pick last season, who just had an ACL recovery go terribly wrong. He can now take a full medical redshirt season. He hasn't even turned 22 yet, and then he can head into the third year of his NFL career at 23 years old, with a lot to kind of prove and earn, a lot of talent there, and hopefully someday Jonathan Brooks can get back. And I think the Rico Dowdle signing is the Panthers front office telling us that they're not quite ready to just give up on Jonathan Brooks. And this conversation could look a lot different next year, depending how that recovery goes. So there's your running back group. Really not anything to say with Bryce Young, and certainly not Andy Dalton, in terms of them getting much of a multiplier from the quarterback in the run game. They're in a cluster that really doesn't get a boost there, that ranks 22nd to 28th for QB run multiplier. Bryce Young theoretically could be used on read options and stuff. Maybe someday they want to implement that, but because of his frame, I think they just want him getting hit as little as possible, and honestly, that's probably smart. For example, Bryce Young had 6 designed runs last season for -8 yards, and I would imagine those were QB sneaks. So that kind of answers that. But let's get to our last position group for this offense. With the offensive line, really nice balanced group here. They rank inside the top 10 here already, and I think I said it earlier, but if you have the Panthers ranking higher than 28th, I would imagine it's the offensive line that really is the reason for that. And honestly, that's fair. I'm as big as anybody on the idea that offensive line matters more than it gets credit for, at least. But yeah, they rank 9th for overall offensive line, and it's a very balanced group. They rank 8th to 10th for pass blocking and 8th for run blocking, with B grades across the board. And this is the same group we saw last season. So it's almost like there's not that much to say about this group. You've got Ikem Ekwonu at left tackle. Still, in my opinion, a young, ascending, former first-round pick, now heading into year 4. But, kind of looked good in his rookie season. Year 2 was awful, as it was for everybody involved on this Panthers team. And then last year, he kind of settled back in. And I do think, especially last year, we saw the exciting version of Ikem Ekwonu, where he was one of the better run-blocking prospects coming out of college in a while. And last year, he really made an impact in this run game with his athleticism. I think just allowed to play fast and just settled in, and this offense just made more sense to him, more experience in the league, just playing with the speed of the game, playing fast, playing confident. You could see it much more in the run game. And then in pass protection, still pretty streaky, I'm not going to lie, but certainly better than what we saw in 2023. So his rookie season was pretty solid. And then last year, a lot of good starts, some shakier starts, but I think year 4 now, expecting more consistency. And he's one of these young pieces that now heading into year 4, you're really hoping he's still getting better. And, ideally he can become the best player on this offensive line, frankly. And maybe that can happen as early as this season. But what really matters with him is I think he restored the confidence the Panthers fans can have in him. But then next to him, you got one of their two big free agent signings from last offseason. The cheaper of the two in Damian Lewis, though there wasn't a huge difference between the play of Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt. Both these guys were frankly awesome last year. Now, to be fair, just having gone back and watched the tape, it did feel like way more often than not, it was Lewis getting the double team help from the center. I think they viewed Lewis and whoever was out there at center as their quote unquote weakest links in pass protection. And they had those two guys more often than not working together, with Robert Hunt more often getting left on an island, which I think led to Hunt's drop off in his pass blocking grade compared to his career. So just an observation from the tape there. I do think still if you can isolate Damian Lewis in pass protection with a really good pass rusher, he's not amazing in that regard, but clearly has settled in as a pretty solid to good pass protector over his last couple of years. Got better every year in Seattle, whereas when he came into the league, he was a liability. So he's come a long way in that sense and maybe can still get better. But he was up there for their best run blocker last year as well. And him and Ekwonu together is a really just nasty, athletic, strong duo. And now year two in this offense with these two guys getting to work together on those combo blocks and passing things off on wide zone and everything. I wouldn't be surprised if we see these two guys together even take another leap into that next tier of like really excellent run blocking together. Maybe the area of this offensive line that has the most potential. But inversely, I think from a pass blocking perspective, it is that left side that if they're going to lose, that's probably where the pressure is going to come from more often than not. Or from the center here. They have an okay center setup. Austin Corbett, who made the switch to center last season, played well. Really not a surprise. I mean, when he's been healthy, he's been a pretty good player. 2023, he did have his struggles kind of coming back from injury in that disastrous 2023 Panthers team. But you go back to his 2 years in LA where he earns the contract with the Panthers. And then in that first year with the Panthers, he was really good, looked like a really nice signing for them. And then again, you fast forward to this season, he starts the season at center, plays really well, but then goes down with the injury for the season. And that's now back-to-back years. He's played under 300 snaps for this Panthers team. They bring him back on a cheap one-year deal, and it's really more of a matter of health for Corbett. He's never going to be like a dominant enforcer of a lineman, but just really steady, adequate player when he is healthy. So it's a, maybe unlikely hope that he's going to be there the whole year, but they're, I think relatively confident in him, as a player and within that locker room. Bring him back on a 1 year, $3 million deal, which is certainly more than just a true veteran minimum. And it sounds like he's kind of plugged in as their starter again. Still just 29 years old. So it's not like he's super old or anything. So, feeling all right about that. I will say this, they have options as a backup. Brady Christensen has played a good bit of center for this team at this point, and I think he's been pretty damn solid when he's played there. So I think between the two of those guys, you feel very good about your floor at center. And then even Cade Mays, he was really the majority of their starts at center last season, because I think Christensen was getting hurt as well, or maybe Ekwonu missed some time, and they kicked Christensen to tackle and then plug Cade Mays in. They had some shifting of the line going around for sure, but man, Cade Mays was a pleasant surprise. This guy that's kind of made the whole transition inside. I want to say I remember watching him play tackle at Tennessee. Came in as a guard, and now he's like, a 6'4", 325-pound center. We're seeing more and more of these bigger centers in the league these days, but he held up really well. I think in really his first experience playing center, as far as I know. Once upon a time was like a highly recruited dude out of the SEC, which I think alludes to like, he does have traits. He's really strong. He quote, hashtag looks the part, Cade Mays. But he was moving guys in the run game. He had some really good games driving guys off the ball in some of Chuba's good weeks. So he can play. And again, they really did a good job sheltering whoever was in at center, working on double teams with Damian Lewis as much as they could. So he can he can hang in there and hold his own as a starting center as well, really in both phases. And those three pieces together is kind of your starting center. And that to me is their weakest link. And that's not the worst case scenario by any stretch of the imagination to be your weakest link. And by the way, Christensen can also play tackle or guard. He's like the perfect sixth man for this offensive line. And they have Yosh Nijman, who's a really good backup tackle as well. Ended up getting a lot of starts in Green Bay as a pass protector. So just to kind of talk a lot about the depth there for a second, because I do think it's going to come into play at some point with Austin Corbett's injury issues. But we can kind of shift back to the starters for a second. Robert Hunt is your right guard. Awesome signing. He was everything they could have asked for, I think. And like I said, I think they demanded more out of Robert Hunt in the passing game than was ever demanded out of him in Miami, which is a very unique offense. We don't need to get into it, but a lot of quick passes and play action. A lot more isolated drop back passing game for Robert Hunt. And we did see a dip in his pass blocking efficiency from what he did in Miami by the metrics. Gave up a career high in pressures at 26, which isn't horrible, but he did have some bad games in there. Denver got him. Kansas City got him with Wharton and Chris Jones in there. And Tampa Bay, week 17, got him, which, to be fair, he might have been injured in that game because that was his worst game of the season per pass blocking efficiency. And I'm just kind of eyeballing this. He only played 47 snaps and then didn't play week 18. So he could have been playing hurt in that as well. But either way, dude, like, you still watch the tape. He's most weeks awesome in pass protection, despite some hiccup weeks. And then as a run blocker, he's nasty, man. He just has awesome play strength. He has all of the tenacity you look for as a blocker. I think his technique's gotten better every single year. So I'm definitely a big fan of Robert Hunt. He's been really worth every penny they spent on him, even if it was a lot of pennies. It was kind of shocking when free agency hit and he got like $20 million. But for where this Panthers team was, to go out and spend $33 million to secure your interior guard duo, they're damn happy about that now, especially as the guard market has kind of spiked, in large part thanks to the Panthers and the success that these guys had. And then you round things out with their rock, Taylor Moton, just year in, year out is like a top 5 right tackle, plug and play. Dude's such a stud. Nobody talks about him, but he's one of the more technically sound pass protecting right tackles in the league. He's got a good anchor. He's a good enough athlete. He's a solid run blocker. I don't know that he's like an elite athlete or elite play strength or anything like that, but he gets the job done in that phase as well. He's, I think, coming up on another contract extension. He's getting up there in age, like 31, I think. Just double checking that. Yeah, he turns 31 here in a couple months. So plenty of room, I think, to get one more nice contract extension here. Wouldn't be overly surprised if they got that taken care of here before the year starts, because I don't think they want to really rock the boat with this offensive line. Clearly, I mean, it's really all the same guys that they had last year. And the only guy left to really talk about here would be Chandler Zavala. You know, he was a 4th round pick, played next to Ikem Ekwonu at NC State, and his run blocking tape was fantastic coming out. Definitely had questions about pass protection, and those have surfaced in the league, but mostly in 2023, where he was a turnstile, to be fair, and they put him out there too early on a really just putrid Panthers team, and everybody, again, had kind of career lows, really, or just a bad season, generally speaking, on that Panthers offensive line, and he got overwhelmed by that mess, but he got out in spots last season and graded out much better. So the tools are there. Not every offensive lineman just hits the ground running. There's a world too where Zavala can, I don't know, maybe he learns center or becomes a really nice backup. He's not taking Damian Lewis or Robert Hunt's job anytime soon, but maybe some opportunities come for Zavala down the stretch. And I wouldn't quite give up on him quite yet. And then they do get a slight boost. They're a pretty good team in terms of skill blockers. Tommy Tremble, we talked a good bit about him earlier, and Adam Thielen as well from the slot's a nice player. And I'd like to think they can get more out of T-Mac. Maybe one of the most frustrating things about him was he didn't always put in maximum effort as a run blocker, but maybe getting to the pros, they can get that out of him. And Xavier Legette as well has a ton of potential as a run blocker. So they are in the top 13 for the run blocking boost from the skill players. But that rounds out this Panthers offense, this young Panthers offense, which, as I've said, we're very much ranking these teams at or near their floor. These are week one rankings. And the Panthers come in as my 24th ranked offense overall, which where the Panthers were at heading into last season, Panthers fans, I think, will take that. But if they finish the season ranking 24th, I think Panthers fans might be a little bit disappointed in that. I think you want to see this at least be a top 20 offense with, just a lot to prove with the quarterback and the weapons. And even Dave Canales, I think, is going to have a chance to show us a next level in himself as a coach this year and how we perceive him and what he brings to the table as an offensive mind. So much potential for this Panthers offense, but just a lot to prove. And the splits there put them 24th in passing game. But they are top half in the league in run game, where they are much more proven with what they accomplished last year, ranking 15th in the run game. So at least that gives them a very nice floor. But now let's talk about this Panthers defense. Hey, it can really only go up from here, Panthers fans. At least there's some good news there. But let's begin with the defensive line, which is one of the most polarizing units in the league in terms of being good in one phase and bad in the other. This group actually comes inside the top 4 of D-line run defense for me, ranking 3rd to 4th with an A- grade. I do think where this Panthers defense as a whole will be much improved is with their run defense, which, just going from historically terrible to adequate alone would be just the biggest of upgrades for this team. But obviously setting the tone up front gives them potential, if they can get better on the back end, to actually be a good run defense overall. That's let's not put the cart before the horse, but at least up front here, things should be much better from a run defense perspective. But from a pass rushing angle, still ranking 32nd, and you could certainly make the case that either the Panthers or the Saints or the Falcons, one of those NFC South teams, was the 32nd pass rush last year. And that's where the Panthers still find themselves here as we head into this season. But those combine to make this group the 25th overall defensive line. I do put more weight towards the pass rushing side of things than the run defense, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise there. But with a C+ grade overall for the defensive line, again, ranking 25th. Now, far and away, the number one reason I think this defense will be better defending the run, and certainly this defensive line ranks much better defending the run than they did last season, is that they are returning, at worst, a top 3 run defending defensive tackle and their best overall player on the entire team in Derek Brown, who was already underrated to begin with, but now after playing in just one game last season is potentially the most forgotten man in the NFL as one of its, top 30 to 40 players overall. Derek Brown is freaking awesome. We knew when he came out of college that he was a run defense over pass rush style defensive tackle. And that run defense has really only gotten better year in, year out since he's been in the league. And, you do kind of have to go back to 2023 and assume he's going to be able to recover from a meniscus injury. It seems pretty optimistic that the timetable gives him plenty of time to get back to full speed, and that is something that should repair even better than like an ACL, for example. But you go back to 2023, and I think that was his best year of all of his good years defending the run. And it's just, there's just not a lot of guys like him. It's like there's Dexter Lawrence and Dexter is Dexter, but then there's not a ton of real like 3-down, two-way defensive tackles like Derek Brown that I'll talk about his pass rushing, but someone that can get after the quarterback, but really at 325 pounds can take on double teams, dominate one-on-one blocks, but still have some of the athleticism to penetrate and keep up with ball carriers in the backfield and just be a disruptor and a space eater together. That is really why I consider him an elite run defense defensive tackle. There might only be two of these in the league, in my opinion, in Derek Brown and Dexter Lawrence. And just dropping that back into this defense is an excellent starting point towards this group, at least being better than what they were last year, even if that is a very, very low bar to clear. Now, Derek Brown is a better run defender than a pass rusher, but he is still this team's best pass rusher, and that's frankly not a good thing. I think Derek Brown, in an ideal situation, should be a number 2 rusher. He has some power. He can cross your face with a rip move. And when he does win, because he's so big and strong, he can have some hilariously dominant wins for sure. But the more capable, bigger, faster, stronger guards in the league can at least match his traits a little bit more. And I wouldn't say he has elite get off to have this dominant speed to power bull rush, and I wouldn't say he has the athleticism or pass rushing skill set to be this like consistent number 1 dominator of a pass rusher from the inside. He's more of a stable kind of 40 to 50 pressure, 6 to 8 sack per season type of guy, which really lines him up as a number 2 player, and that's fine if they still had Brian Burns, or if they could hit on some of these other young players. But obviously, him being by far their best pass rusher is a big reason why this team ranks 32nd in pass rush. Even if he's a good player, all these teams are in an arms race for pass rushers, and Derek Brown is towards the bottom of the league in terms of who would rank as his team's best pass rusher, if that makes sense. But it's not just that point. It is also that there just isn't really another guy here that you feel all that good about. I mean, they gave Tershawn Wharton a bunch of money. Wharton did play his best football on the Super Bowl stretch for the Chiefs. His last 6 games going back to the end of the regular season were probably his kind of breakout, most efficient pass rushing moments in his time as a Chief, whereas he's been an okay player for a while. And then again, the last 6 weeks, if that's what they're paying for here, he could actually be worth the $15 million a year that they gave him. That's a pretty big if, and that's a very small sample size on what a 4-year career where he's been kind of just a rotational penetrating athlete that they can line up next to Chris Jones, who they know is going to get double teams. And, he can cause some chaos. And it's not that he's a bad player, but is he a $15 million a year player? And was this perhaps a slight overreaction and overpay after they unfortunately missed out on landing Milton Williams in free agency, which would have been amazing to get him in here? I would argue, yeah, they missed on Milton Williams and went down the board a little bit. Certainly went down at least a tier, if not 2 or 3, and said, well, we didn't get Milton, let's pay Tershawn Wharton. And I don't know, man. I think he can get off the ball. I think he can push back NFL guards that don't have the best anchor, and he definitely has the athleticism to run stunts and loops, and he'll be involved, and sadly, he's probably going to be their second best pass rusher. And I think, again, it's going to be better than what they were getting from the interior rushers last year, but I wouldn't even necessarily consider him an impact player. He, to me, has always kind of been this rotational, undersized athlete on your defensive line that, if used correctly, can make his presence felt throughout the course of a game, though I wouldn't go as far as describing him as an impact player or really someone that I feel great about as a starting level player for you. It was definitely a contract that surprised me a good bit. I would say he's more of a $6 million a year player, not a $15 million a year player. And I would love to be wrong about that. But the other side of that is he cannot defend the run for a lick unless you're putting him as more of a defensive end where he's, splitting against tackles or something. But any situation where he's got to take on double teams between the tackles, that is not where you want him. So if it's early downs, really the only spot you want him lined up is in those penny 5-1 fronts that we hinted at earlier in the coaching breakdown, where you're either going to have Derek or Bobby Brown as the nose tackle, and then Wharton can be kind of an inside shade where you just ask him to shoot gaps and disrupt the play in the backfield for everybody else to clean up. And in that specific role, he can do some nice stuff, but he has no anchor and frankly will be off the field quite a bit on earlier downs because we'll just stick with this interior group. They did also pay Bobby Brown, who I frankly think is a better overall player slightly than Tershawn Wharton. He doesn't get quite as much money. I think his was 3 years, $21 million. So if you say between the two of them, you're paying them about 11 mil each, that gets me a little bit closer to valuing these guys appropriately, I suppose. But I think Bobby Brown has incrementally gotten better every year for the Rams. He was really the only guy in that Rams front that could actually take on double teams, hold the line against the run and anchor. He is 320 pounds, and he's always been a guy that came out as a mid-round draft pick where it was like, well, he looks the part, but can he ever figure out the technique and improve his pad level? And he has not been dominant in that sense, but has certainly gotten better every year. And there's reason to believe that he could even get a little bit better. I did think that was a good signing. And he is a nice complement with Tershawn Wharton, at least in the sense of a base 4-2 nickel. Again, Brown being the early down presence and Wharton being the guy you bring in obvious passing downs. You're at least getting the most out of these guys' strengths and limiting their weaknesses, where Bobby Brown just isn't a pass rusher at all, other than the occasional bull rush win, but he just really hasn't developed technique in that sense. So they spent their money on those two guys, probably an overpay for the combo of them, and they're going to have to rely on Ejiro Evero to scheme these guys into advantageous situations as we've described, but it is better than what they had to work with last year. Where the Panthers do actually start to get, honestly, I'll say special and stand out against the rest of the league is their interior defensive line depth. We've already described 3 players, but they still have A'Shawn Robinson on the roster. Maybe he becomes a cap casualty as we get closer to the season, but at this point, I expect him to be here. And honestly, if they just didn't sign Bobby Brown and kept A'Shawn Robinson, there's a lot of similarities in those guys' games. Brown's a little bit more fresh legs. And A'Shawn certainly didn't play up to what he had been in previous seasons in his first year with Carolina, but now getting pushed into a rotational role, if he is going to stay on this team, that's phenomenal DT4 depth, just as a veteran that's done it, really. Not really a pass rushing presence, but again, another body to eat up some meaningful run defense snaps, allowing you to not have to play Tershawn Wharton on earlier downs. Shy Tuttle, that's the one where I'm like, you probably will be looking to cut him. He's still hanging around here after they gave him a pretty nice chunk of change coming from New Orleans, and he's taken his money and run with this team, frankly. For an undrafted guy that is an undersized run defense forward player, he clearly, gave it his all in New Orleans, got his money, and frankly just has not put as much effort into defending the run. I'll just call it like I see it. He has been nothing short of a liability for this team, so I wouldn't be surprised if he gets cut, but he does have a history of being a good run defender 3 years ago. Maybe a fire could get lit under his ass. But I think the Cam Jackson pick in the 5th round just adds to this. I mean, he's a big dude, a run defense oriented player, still has to learn to improve his pad level and stuff. Frankly, Cam Jackson is very similar to a young Bobby Brown, where he literally he looks the part. He's 6'4", 330 pounds. I recall his arm length being pretty good, but just got to improve the technique. But I do think the effort and play strength is there, and it's a really nice room for him to come in and learn. So maybe not an immediate impact, but could eat up some snaps, come in and play fresh and play hard for this team. And then maybe down the road, you are talking about him earning more of a role with this team. And then you got some guys that did have to play last year, LeBrian Ray and 6th-round pick Jaden Crumedy. Might as well just say Jaden Crummy for how good he was in his rookie season last year. Got him. Yeah, it's a fun interior defensive line group, though, despite having some criticisms about, maybe overpaying for Tershawn Wharton, which anytime you give a guy that much money, you might create some unrealistic expectations for the players and maybe for the fans. But I think we maybe tempered those expectations. The group is upgraded, and it is very deep, and this is the strength of this defense right here with this interior defensive line. So I don't want to sell that group short. And again, ranking 3rd to 4th for D-line run defense, that is a standout unit for this defense. At least they have something, right? Because last year they had nothing. But unfortunately, the core reason why this D-line ranking and the pass rush especially comes in much lower is this edge group is probably the worst in the league, at least from a week 1 perspective. You are entirely, not even almost entirely, literally entirely depending on a pair of day 2 rookies at this position to come in and be good right away, frankly, if you don't want this pass rush to stink. And there's a history with day 2 edge rushers of these guys just not working out. Now, there is plenty of reason to believe, number one, that these guys' tape was just really good in Nick Scorton and Prince Emmanuel. But number two, there's reason to believe that because this edge class was infamously, historically deep, that these aren't your typical 2nd and 3rd round edge players, and that these guys can actually make an impact for you. And I would love for them to do that, but it is tough for any rookie edge rusher, especially kind of drafted outside the top 10 to 15. A lot of these guys, take some time to get up to speed in this position group, in this NFL. But let's start with Nick Scorton. And he especially, I think certainly would have been a 1st round pick, at least a late 1st round pick in a different draft class, very much in line with kind of the George Karlaftis picks of the world. Maybe other comparisons would include Derek Barnett or maybe even a Felix and a DK Uzama for the Chiefs. And he obviously hasn't worked out as a 1st round pick. But a guy that is an absolute technician, has great size and pretty good power, produced, at least going back to his sophomore season. But someone that you don't necessarily view as this exceptional athlete that might not have the standout traits to emerge as a high-end number 1 rusher someday. And that led to him falling down the board a decent bit, of course. But he is a good player. And I do believe in Nick Scorton to at least be within the first 2 years of his career, maybe something like what Jadeveon Clowney has been for this Panthers team and other teams over the last couple of years as a good number 2 edge rusher. I do think with his cross chop, the spin move, and enough power, he's going to have ways to win. He's got the size. He can defend the run. I think he'll get better at all of that stuff. And he to me, was a relatively high floor edge rushing prospect, especially as a number 2 pick to get him in this class. I love that they traded up to get him. But he does come with an interesting narrative that could reshape what I said about him maybe not being the traitsiest, highest upside player. Scorton is fascinating in that at Texas A&M, they had him playing at 280 pounds. Yet, unlike his counterpart in Shamar Stewart, Nick Scorton really isn't a power player, especially as a pass rusher. Most of his pass rush wins come on a cross chop and a spin move. And he's got really good swipes. He has adequate bend for a guy playing at 280 pounds. He's got quick, light feet. That shows in that spin move, but he's got inside swipes. Really a technically sound, finesse-y rusher. And immediately coming out of that program that really kind of let everybody down, seemingly. Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart. We saw Nolan transfer to Ole Miss and emerge as a 1st-round caliber prospect. He gets out of that program and is immediately no, I'm not playing at 280 pounds. That's not my style. He comes in at 258 pounds, didn't work out at that size, which adds just a ton of fog of war to like, what type of athlete is he going to be? But man, there's a world where he looks twitchier, that his get off is better. Frankly, that could help his power if it gives him a better first step, if he's just not carrying bad weight in that sense. But especially like the cross chop and the spin move, if he's even lighter on his feet, this could be a completely different version of Nick Scorton than we've seen in him at college. So he really stood out to me as probably my favorite second round prospect. And if someone took him at the end of the first round, I would have gotten behind that as well. And even though I like tried to temper expectations and say, yeah, he's a rookie, he's got a lot to prove, he's got to come in and make an early impact, which is difficult to do for a rookie edge rusher. Even if I set the table with that, I'm going to be honest, I'm really excited that they got Nick Scorton. I still think it's most likely that he's a good number 2 player. I'll go with that kind of Jadeveon Clowney-esque level player. And ideally down the road, you can find even another more dominant pass rusher. But it's fun to think that there might be even more in there that we don't know about with Scorton. Really, I am, though, excited for this pick and excited to watch this player this year. And he should have plenty of opportunity to get out there, even if it is going to be kind of a big rotation, which we'll continue to break down here. But I want to stick by talking about these rookies, even if I'm not listing Princely Umanmielen as one of the 5 starters on the graphic there. We've got DJ Wanham up there. But Umanmielen is the other rookie, obviously, that you're hoping can make an impact out the gate and not have this Panthers pass rush be 32nd in the league. Umanmielen is a little bit more of a simple evaluation for me, or at least a more simple projection, in that he's an undersized edge rusher that really had dominant pass rushing tape in the SEC with get off, bend, and like Nick Scorton, one of the best spin moves in the entire draft, kind of a speed to bend finesse rusher that unfortunately not only is he undersized, but he doesn't have great speed. He ran like a 4.73, and you can tell on tape that for a speed rusher that at his best is going to threaten the top of the tackle's drop and get that corner and bend around him. While I would say he has exceptional bend for a college prospect, he doesn't have that extra gear to really threaten the top of that corner. And it just takes upside off of who he is as a player. Tackles don't have to set quite as wide, which leaves them better prepared to handle Umanmielen's counter move, which is that inside spin counter. But he does still have a great get off. He has that bend. He can still threaten the corner. It's just not at an elite level. And then he's really good with that inside counter, typically with that spin move, but he does have swipes and stuff that can get you inside. So like, you kind of know how he wins, what he does. You understand that the better tackles in the NFL, you know, they're going to be able to handle his fastball and his changeup, and that's kind of what he's got. I think the best hope for Umanmielen to be probably anything more than just like a good third pass rushing specialist type of rotational player in the league. The best bet for him to become more than that would probably be to bulk up a little bit and add more of a threat of a bull rush without losing that quickness for the spin move and the bend. That's a tough ask for an athlete, but I would say that's a maybe that he could develop that, because there were tiny flashes of power, and you look at this dude's arms especially, and it's like, well, like, you should be able to add some more play strength to your arms without losing your athletic profile, probably. Like, if you catch him at the wrong angle, he looked like a receiver at times. So it's something to keep an eye on for sure, but for now, like, he does not defend the run because he is slender. Though I suppose, again, you bulk up, you become a better run defender, you become a more useful potential starter for this team. But with all that said, could I see Umanmielen and his skill set kind of working for what it is right away and actually having a pretty high floor as it enters the league, and honestly giving them a better pass rush than they got from anybody kind of not named Jadeveon Clowney last year, and a full season of Umanmielen is potentially better than 8 games of Jadeveon Clowney, which they got last year? Could that be possible? Yes, I would say so. I think outside of bulking up, he is very much a what you see is what you get type of prospect. And those are really like the points of fascination with this edge group. They have their 2 former Vikings edge rushers here that they're paying, DJ Wanham played a bunch for them last year. They bring in Patrick Jones. He was an eye-opening amount of money for, frankly, a bad player. He got like 2 years, $15 million, which is, it's not a big contract, but Patrick Jones to me is like a veteran minimum 1 year, $1.2 million pickup kind of player. He has flashes as a pass rusher, and he kind of stumbled into 7 sacks out of like 20 pressures or something last year. But his pressure rate, his pass rush win rate is extremely low. He's a guy that kind of tries a bunch of different stuff, and occasionally he'll catch a tackle leaning on the wrong foot, and he'll have a pretty looking pass rush move. So his agent maybe put together a pretty looking highlight reel. But the down to down consistency from him is just not there. I just don't want to see a lot of Patrick Jones, frankly. I want to see these rookies playing as much as possible. Wanham, I understand, like he's at least a bigger bodied kind of try hard with the length. I understand him being out there, especially over like Princely Emmanuel on earlier downs. But if it's anything more than 3rd and 7, I want DJ Wanham's ass off the field so I can see what Emmanuel can do. And it's really those 4 guys I expect to be starters. And then hopefully as the year goes on, they kind of phase out Patrick Jones and maybe realize they made a mistake there, unless he obviously has some crazy year 5 development that we don't see coming, but that's extremely unlikely. There are still some more names here just to quickly go through. DJ Johnson, former 3rd round pick and a major reach by the former organization. And I kind of liked DJ Johnson for what he was, but even then he comes off the 3rd round and you're like, oh my God, what are they thinking? He's already like 27, 28 years old. He's really old coming out. He did at least give you some effort as a bigger body dude against the run last year. So he might be able to give you some useful snaps on earlier downs. A bull rush only player, though, whose bull rush has not worked in the NFL. That's obviously a problem. Amari Barno, really athletic dude coming out that they're, hoping can show some development. Boogie Basham is here. Talk about a former 2nd round pick that just couldn't really break through as a starter, just doesn't have those traits. He's unfortunately kind of in the Nick, like he'd be on like the low end of the Nick Scorton spectrum with what's happened with his career. But yeah, he ended up in New York after 2 years in Buffalo and kind of a weird scheme fit. He kind of needs his hand in the dirt. Maybe Avero can find some interesting ways to use him. He was a good player at Wake Forest, but just hasn't worked in the league. Wasn't useless in more of a 4-4-3 style defense in Buffalo for his first couple of years. Just a lower upside guy. And then Thomas Incoom, keep an eye on him as well. I don't know that the opportunities are going to come around for him, but a productive player going back to Central Michigan that I think has had some flashes in very small moments in the league. And he did get on the field a little bit for them last year. PFF actually has him with a 99 defensive grade on 1 snap. Week 8 against Denver. It might have been a special team snap. Panthers fans, was that a blocked punt or something? I actually couldn't locate that play on NFL Pro. I bet it was special teams. But anyway, fun fact, let's keep it moving. That wraps up our defensive line. Obviously, work to do. If the young edge rushers can click, this is going to be a pretty fun defensive line with probably one more piece to add into the future, but a much improved unit from where they were last year. And I do think they're going to be able to get teams into 3rd and longs where you can tap into a pass rushing specialist like Princely Emmanuel and a little bit more than maybe they were able to last season, and tap into what Ejiro Evero can bring to the table, scheming up the pass rush as well. And those could be small differences that make, big changes to the overall defensive product from last season. But unfortunately, as we go to the linebacker room, this is the same group. They ran out of assets to address this room. They're going to have to run it back with Josie Jewell and the young Trevin Wallace and see what they can get out of this group. It is, for me, the lowest ranking linebacker room in the league. They are 32nd in run defense for the linebacker room, and they rank 27th to 28th, a little bit better in the linebacker coverage side of things, though obviously still not great. We can keep this one nice and easy. I mean, Josie Jewell is a nice, adequate starter when healthy. He hasn't been able to stay healthy or get through a season healthy for 3 straight years, so you almost anticipate that he's going to miss some time. he loves to stick his head in the mud, and clearly he doesn't have the most durable frame. So like he deals with nagging injuries and misses games and stuff. But he's just not a traitsy linebacker, but he's extremely heady, and that kind of meets in the middle of just being this average product. He sees the game well. He goes through his run keys. He can navigate his way through blocks and even has some play strength to take on blocks as a run defender, but he does miss some tackles because of that lack of length and athleticism. And then as a coverage defender, Josey Jewell is a name that always comes to my mind in terms of zone IQ. I'm always impressed throughout the course of a season, some of the plays he's able to make, reading the quarterback's eyes, understanding route combinations, and getting to certain landmarks that even fast linebackers don't. So I don't think he's a useless coverage linebacker, but you sure as hell don't want him manning up running backs out of the backfield or manning up tight ends. And even though his zone IQ is good, he is limited in terms of range, both with his athleticism and his length to kind of get his way in the way of passing lanes. So he's fine. He is the definition of a fine, okay starter as long as he's healthy, but you have to attribute the fact that he's had a hard time staying healthy. And then you have Trevin Wallace, who's your just classic mid-round athletic developmental traits-based linebacker. And he's had some good moments in coverage. I'll give him that. When he sees it, he can make impact plays to get in the way of passing lanes. Still developing the zone IQ. It's good to have Josey Jewell next to him to teach him a thing or two. And you hope that phase can maybe actually, by the end of the year, be a strength in Trevin Wallace's game. If he can kind of get all these snaps here in year two, if he's got the mind for it and the work ethic for it, he has all of the traits to be not just an okay coverage defender, but an actual good one. And it certainly isn't crazy for a third, fourth round pick. I think it was third round to turn into that. He was really a good dart throw to make for where they got him, and now in year two to kind of give him this opportunity to show what he can do. As a run defender, though, that is really where he's going to be a problem for you if you don't see improvements. He's just really not up to speed with his run keys. He overshoots gaps. He undershoots gaps. He doesn't really have the block take on ability. Even if he does read it correctly, he can get drowned out against the run. But he does have decent size on top of that athleticism to hopefully get better in that phase too. So I like the bet on Trevin Wallace, but that is exactly what it is a bet on athleticism and development. He was kind of forced onto the field earlier than I think they planned last season because they did have Shaq Thompson. They did have Josey Jewell heading into the year. They spend that third round pick on him. I'm seeing it now, the 72nd pick. So third, not fourth round. But he got out there last year, and I would say the coverage stuff was promising. The run defense was pretty much what you expected for what he was in college and why he was a third-round pick. So total wait and see, but there's potential there. And if you're a Panthers fan, knowing where your team is at right now, I think you're at least excited to see what he could do. But you also understand that it might not happen for an athletic linebacker. So many of these mid-round dart throws just don't work out. So just complete crapshoot. And then your depth, it's like, do we really want to spend time talking about these guys? You bring in Christian Roseboom, who had to play for the Rams, who were maybe last year's worst linebacking group. They let him go, and I understand why. He's got an okay nose for the football and run defense, but not a great nose, and he's not a consistent player in really any phase. He has experience, so if Jewell goes down, at least it's a guy that's comfortable being on an NFL field. Doesn't mean he's good out there. And then really everybody else is just kind of undrafted style dart throws. Chairless did play a little bit last year, and he had some good moments. So if anybody's going to kind of surprise in this room outside of Trevin Wallace, it would probably be Clouden Chairless. He ended up playing in 5 games, 158 snaps last year. And there were some moments last year where I had to stop and say, wait, who's 53 for the Panthers? That was a nice run stop or whatever it might have been. But, obviously linebacker was not a priority for this team this offseason. And frankly, for where they were at, I think that's good process. The linebacker, to me, should be the last group that you kind of focus on after you fix your D-line and your secondary here, which is a good transition to a unit that they are still in the process of fixing. And even this secondary didn't get a whole lot of attention from this Panthers front office, though they did spend money to bring in Trayvon Merrick. but it's an okay-ish secondary that, has some good players on it, but I would say the width of this Panthers team. We always say, oh, their depth stinks. People don't use the word width enough when talking about the width of the starting unit, whereas the depth should be the backups, in my opinion. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it isn't the Panthers' depth in the secondary that's a problem. Well, that is a problem. It's the width of guys that are starting on this unit that are problems. But you do have J.C. Horn, who I would say kind of poked his head into the top 10 cornerback debate this last season. With Horn, it's not a talent question. It never really has been. It's just availability. And he felt like, at least for the first time, played in the majority of the season. He did miss a couple of games, but most corners miss a couple games. But he did, for the first time in his career, played over 1,000 snaps. And he ends up with a reception percentage allowed of 53.5%. We've discussed with some of these other top corners like Ward and Sauce. Like, you get into the low 50s and you're 53% there, like, you're doing a damn good job making sure guys aren't completing passes against you. But he also had 9 pass breakups, another interception in there. Had some busted coverages, 5 touchdowns allowed on the season. But generally speaking, played up to his hype as the former number 8 overall pick, the guy that they took over Defensive Player of the Year, Pat Surtain. I still can't believe the previous regime did that. And at this point, that's never going to be redeemed. But can J.C. Horn still be a really good number 1 corner for this team if he can stay healthy? Yes, absolutely. I think the instincts from zone are absolutely there. He showed that last season. And I think for a guy that you can run press man coverage, for the most part, you can have him come up and jam like number 1 wide receivers, and he can hang in there pretty damn well. If it's a faster receiver, you probably want to give him some help over the top. He's not a true burner of a corner, but physical, good ball skills, a little over physical at times, was penalized 12 times last season, but I like to stay pretty consistent and not, bang on corners too much for being over physical, because most of the time they're not going to call it, but JC didn't get away with it much this most recent season. He had 6 penalties on his career before this year, and he had 12 this season. I would think that number is going to come down a little bit. But yeah, JC is obviously the core reason why this is at least an adequate secondary with a C+ grade. You have something like a top 10 corner as your number 1 corner. It's going to keep you out of the cellar for your secondary ranking. But other than him, I mean, we'll talk about Merrick. Merrick's a nice player, but other than him and Merrick, like, this is all backup caliber players for the most part. I mean, your number 2 corner is Mike Jackson, who, let's give Mike Jackson some credit. He's hung in there both with Seattle and Carolina this year. He's hung in there really despite being one of the slowest starting corners in the league and been an adequate player. I think ideally he's not a starter for you because he just has certain matchups in certain weeks where it's hard to watch him try to move and play this position at times. And maybe someday there's a future for him as a safety because he is physical. He's a good run defender. He's a smart corner. And I don't hate Mike Jackson. Again, I want to give him credit for kind of exceeding expectations for really all of it, where he was drafted, how he played in Seattle, which was okay, and now how he's played for Carolina. He gets a contract extension to come back and be a starter here. For a team that had bigger fish to fry, a lot of needs to fill, to get him back on the cheap as a placeholder, kind of Band-Aid starter, it's an adequate option. But certainly for a number 2 corner, someone that good passing games can take advantage of. And then as your slot corner, I mean, Chow Smith-Wade is a fun year 2 5th round pick. I think any other team in the league, you're looking at him in the depth group and it's like, yeah, well, we'll see what he can do. He, made some fun plays and an opportunity, loves to hit, physical dude. Like, he fits the mold of a slot corner, but he was not a good coverage player as a rookie and frankly wasn't a great coverage prospect coming out. So probably not someone that should be starting for an NFL secondary at this point in his career, but maybe he can surprise. I'm not even necessarily betting on it. I just don't think he's got the reactive twitch to be a consistent cover slot. And I would love to be wrong about that, but both the slot corner and outside corner spots feel like positions that are in need of attention and upgrades in the future. And I do think the Panthers are in the conversation for either Jalen Ramsey or Jair Alexander. And I'll say this right now, they still wouldn't be a top 10 secondary. If they're able to land one of those guys, this group immediately jumps up closer to the top 10, getting to pair that level of a player with a JC Horn. And not just that, but knocking off either Mike Jackson or Chal Smith-Wade from the starting lineup would really elevate this group. And honestly, just kind of eyeballing it, and if this happens, I'll share an update on the rankings and all that. But the Panthers would climb probably 2 or 3 spots in my power rankings if that happened. I think especially Jalen Ramsey, just because I don't have the durability concerns on him that I do on Jair. But yeah, if they can pull it off, and you look at the secondary, they very much should be in the market, not just with these starters, but with the depth at corner. They should be in the market to try and obtain a player of that caliber, be it Ramsey or Alexander. But yeah, I'll have an update if that does happen. We can just round out that depth real quick, because there's just, like I said, there's not width here and there's not depth here either. A Caleb Evans is your next guy off the bench. I mean, he was really, really streaky at best for the Vikings, but really just bad with some flashes is probably the better way to put it. Lengthy, athletic guy, but just doesn't really have the, zone IQ, the technique, the reaction time, none of it. Like, he's just all athleticism and nothing else. And then they do get MJ Devonshire. I remember watching him at a Pitt. Frisky corner, maybe a slot candidate to compete with Chal Smith-Wade, but probably not much there. And then 4 other undrafted types. It's a very poor and thin cornerback room. And God, if JC Horn gets hurt again, that's going to derail this defense really, really quickly. But then at safety, they signed Trayvon Merrick. It's a fine signing. I personally don't value Trayvon Merrick for what he is as a $17 million a year, like, premium free agent. He just doesn't have the coverage instincts and consistency on the back end for me to view him as that type of player. I do think he's a good player, probably more of like a $10 million a year player based on what the value he brings to your defense. But I do think from the Panthers' perspective, with what they went through last season, with just slow safeties and an inability to tackle on the back end, that is what Trayvon Merrick is going to bring to the table. Is he's going to bring speed and pursuit and effort downhill to contain big plays, which this team gave up a ton of explosive plays last year. So those digs that the wide receiver breaks off a tackle and then he's off to the races, or the running back gets into the second level and he's gone, Trayvon Merrick will limit those. And that, for this Panthers team, is something they desperately needed. So in a vacuum, overpay, but for the Panthers, I get it. But it did come at a big cost, and they do also still have a hole with their number 2 safety spot. So there still will be some plays where Trayvon Merrick just can't quite get there. And this other safety, I just don't know that they're going to get starting caliber play from right now. And this is another unit where, are you looking at the available free agents and seeing if there's someone out there that could come in and help this group? Because right now I see a position battle between Damani Richardson and Lathan Ransom, a 4th-round rookie. And I said it when they drafted Ransom, but I really maybe my biggest criticism of the Panthers this offseason is that they took Lathan Ransom over Malachi Moore, who we just talked about with the Jets deep dive. And I'll just leave it there. We can track that over time as a take of mine. But I wasn't moved by Lathan Ransom other than, okay, if he didn't dress swagged out and his name wasn't Lathan fucking Ransom, because that's an awesome last name, and he didn't play for the Ohio State Buckeyes, is this a draftable prospect? In my opinion, no. I just don't think he does much as a player that stands out to you. I do think he loves to hit, and there's some highlights on tape, but that does lead to missed tackles. I don't think he's this incredibly consistent run defender. He's okay in that phase of getting to the ball and wrapping guys up. And as a coverage defender, he just to me just didn't close space, didn't have those instincts, didn't have the production. Again, I would love to be wrong there, but I do think with that draft pedigree, he will be in the mix with Damani Richardson, who is a year 2 undrafted pickup from last year. I do remember Damani Richardson in like your way too early mock drafts and your like Madden created, like fan created draft classes. Like I think he was once upon a time viewed as a top prospect. Obviously didn't have the 2023 season that he had hoped for. It goes undrafted here to Carolina, but a nice sized safety, played in the SEC. And look, he did end up playing pretty well, and he cleaned up some of their tackling issues down the stretch that they had dealt with earlier in the year. He ends up starting almost the entire second half of last season, and he had 7 missed tackles out of 403 total snaps, a missed tackle rate at 12%. If you're at 10%, that's like a good number for a safety, because there's a lot of pressure to make tough tackles from this position group. So for an undrafted player, he did all right. And I do think he has the edge over Lathan Ransom, in my opinion, just based on what I've seen from both of these guys, and Richardson doing it in the pro game. Not quite as much to write home about from a coverage perspective on Richardson, but still a young player, and maybe something could come along. So looking like a nice undrafted pickup, if nothing else, as a backup and a special teamer. But right now, unless there's any additions, he very well might be their starter, and it's just not a world that most teams would want to live in right now. But maybe he could really surprise. And then in terms of safety depth, again, not only are you lacking width with your number 2 starter next to Merrick, but you're lacking depth. Granted, Ransom or Richardson would become depth if they lost that competition, but I still don't know that they can play. And then Nick Scott is just horrible. I mean, they brought him over from Cincinnati, where he was like the core reason we were talking about them regretting moving on from Jesse Bates, was just how big of a drastic difference it is what was going from Bates to Scott and all of his busted coverages. Then he ends up having to play, started in like 4 or 5 games in the first quarter of last season. I mean, we talked about like the bad tackling they got from the back end on this safety group. Nick Scott was a core part of that. And then they ended up going to Damani Richardson eventually. I don't know if Nick Scott just got straight benched or injured or whatever, but I mean, I don't know that you really want Nick Scott on your football team. And then it's just a couple of undrafted rookies and Corey Thornton and Travion Thomas, who I didn't end up watching, pretty far down the radar with those guys. So yeah, it's a very thin secondary, obviously, but you got some players, and they're going to have to continue addressing this group, whether it's immediately in free agency, which would be great to see, or into, next year's Panthers team. For what it's worth, the DB run support grade is a B in that tier 2 of teams that rank from 8th to 20th in the league. And they should, for the most part, have some of the tackling issues from the back end cleaned up, especially bringing Merrig in. But I think what they found in Richardson down the stretch as well should at least help a little bit there, assuming he wins that job. But that rounds out this Panthers defense. And, when you see this team come in with the 28th ranking, a team that I think myself and many people are excited to watch this year, you are reminded when you really break this team down just how bad this defense was last year, and how much how many holes they have and how much talent they still have to catch up with this side of the ball. And unfortunately, we obviously still have this projected as an issue for this Panthers team. Even if they don't rank 32nd like they would have last season, they come in as my 30th ranked defense. They do come in as my 31st ranked pass defense. Obviously, with the questions of the pass rush, the lack of depth and width in the secondary, and poor linebackers, there's only so much Azero Evero can do with that group. But where the significant improvements should be is with the run defense. Well, they do come in as my 18th ranked run defense. Really a lot of literally heavy lifting being done by the defensive line, and the upgrades and additions they are getting from that group compared to last year. The linebackers should hurt them in that phase where they did rank 32nd. But yeah, at least, having one part of the defense where you're not complete ass should at least help this Panthers team be somewhat more competitive on this side of the ball. And Ideally, that means your offense doesn't have to put up 35 points every week for you to be in every game, kind of like they did last year. But that is still a possibility, certainly some weeks with this defense. But let's talk about the special teams real quick before we wrap all of this up. They didn't rank out great with my special teams formula. They came in 29th there. They came in low last year in the PFF and DVOA team grades there. So those didn't help. And then, new kicker, new punter in here. No, nothing special with Matthew Wright, who's kind of bounced around. There's reason to believe he might be okay, but he's pretty unproven, frankly, just hasn't kicked a ton over the last couple of years. And then Sam Martin's just, solid veteran punter. He was 21st in punter grade. Matthew Grade's combined grade made him the 24th kicker, if I didn't say that. And then for the returner, we don't even know who's going to be the official returner for this team. It's expected to be Jimmy Horn Jr., who has a chance to prove to be a good returner for this squad, but he's going to come in that kind of cluster of inconsequential returner grades for these teams, ranking 22nd to 31st with a C grade for now with the returner. And then, of course, the overall team coach and culture grade that we discussed at the beginning of the video gets factored in as well. That's our special teams formula. Very mathy, but it does spit out the Panthers as our 29th ranked special teams for this season. And with that, you can put the whole picture together for our 28th ranked Carolina Panthers. Obviously that 24th ranked offense is a somewhat respectable ranking for a group we expect to improve and get better as the year goes on. But there is a lot of pressure on that unit with our 30th ranked defense. And that's a defense that there isn't quite as much upside, I think, to shatter the 30th ranked unit, right? You've got some young players in Scorton and Wallace that you're excited to see. But for the most part, you understand, they still have a lot of work to do on that side of the ball. And I think once you go through the defense and compare it to some of these other teams, you're like, yeah, things were pretty bad last year and it's not going to get fixed overnight. And that is a lot of pressure to put on a still very young offense that does unfortunately leave this Panthers team coming into next season ranking 28th. With that, I will quickly paint the snapshot of where this team's specific strengths, weaknesses, and most importantly, the pivotal factors that could swing this team's success are. And then we'll take a look at the team's schedule. But strengths for me, the offensive line is an unquestioned strength of this Panthers team. I think it absolutely elevates the floor of this offense. We witnessed that last season. They have the width and depth, we'll stick with that dialogue on that offensive line that many teams, maybe even some teams that rank higher on the offensive line that maybe have a little more star talent. The Panthers' infrastructure with 5 quality starters and quality depth is something very few teams have. And then the D-line depth and run defense is something not a lot of teams have. Even if they have talent gaps defensively, they are going to be able to get into third down and not get ran over much more than they did last season, which should lead to a more watchable product on that defensive side of the ball than what we had to witness last season. But they do have weaknesses. Of course, it's pretty much all defense related, pass rush, linebackers, secondary. But those wild cards that could really swing this and hopefully will swing this and make this Panthers team rank much higher than the 28th spot that we have them here right now. That is year 3 of Bryce Young. That is by far the biggest factor here, not just for this Panthers team, but that might be one of the biggest wild cards that any team has, is what version of Bryce Young do we get in this season and beyond. If he plays really like he did in the last stretch of last year, this team really is in business. But I don't think it's smart as well to just assume that that is 100% who he is now, and that none of his issues from before are going to show back up. Right on top of that, of course, you have those young weapons, which if T-Mac and Xavier Legette especially can reach their upside sooner rather than later with, that would theoretically go hand in hand with Bryce Young playing well. I mean, yeah, you're cooking with gas at that point. This could even be something closer to a top 10 offense if everything really hits their upside this season. And then the one thing that could really help this defense be a little bit better would be those rookie edge guys. If they can hit the ground running, You got a run defense that can get you to third down, and then some pass rushers that maybe could help you get off the field a little bit better. That can go a long way for this defense. But let's finish all this up by taking a look at the Panthers' schedule. And it's, for an NFC South schedule, it's actually a little harder than I maybe expected. They kind of got a little screwed. I mean, 3 out of their first 4 games are on the road, at Jacksonville, at Arizona. They host Atlanta week 3, and then at New England. Those are winnable opponents, but that's just not a fun way to start your season. Really, those next 3 games and how they can start is going to dictate how their season goes. If they're not doing well through 7 weeks, it's probably not going to get much better with who their opponents are in the second half of the year. But you got those 2 home games, Miami and Dallas, week 5 and 6, not easy opponents, but winnable games for them. And then they're at the Jets, which I have them as a pick'em game. After the first 7 weeks, you got to host Buffalo, you go to Green Bay, you do get a home game against New Orleans, but then you got back-to-back weeks at Atlanta, at San Francisco, then you host the Rams. Really tough stretch, a bye week, and then it doesn't finish easy either. You've got at New Orleans, they're better than New Orleans in my opinion, but rivalry game, hostile environment. I've got that as a pick'em game. Then you have, 2 out of your last 3 games are against Tampa, which, spoiler alert, but I don't think it's going to come as a surprise. Tampa, to me, is the best team in your division. So you got to finish with those 2. And then you host Seattle week 17. I do think you would think for an NFC South team that won 5 games last year, you'd get a more favorable schedule than this. And it's not great. Vegas does have their over-under at 6.5 wins. They are 24th to 27th in Super Bowl odds at 100-1. I think some of the upside discussions we've had about if things go right, there's maybe a little bit more of a maybe factor with this Panthers team and the theoretical upside of like Bryce Young and T-Mac and this offensive line that maybe some of these other bottom-feeding teams don't have. And then they are 3rd in this division in terms of odds to win it at 4-1. And I do want to believe that this Panthers team can get it done. I really do. And I do believe that the upside is there and that things are heading in the right direction. For me, I do leave with the gut feeling that they are probably a year away from being in more of like division winning, playoff contender conversations. I don't think it's impossible for this team, but would certainly leave it at unlikely. Probably not putting a ton of money on this Panthers team to get to 7 and beyond wins. I think 7 wins is doable, but with this schedule getting up there to 8 wins with this defense and a young offense, probably getting a little bit rich there. My math certainly has them right around that at 6.3 wins. So I think it's a good line from Vegas, but I think I'm probably more on team. Just sit back, enjoy the team, take your wins, accept your losses, and hope things continue to build towards the excitement that is being generated here in Carolina for a team that was a laughingstock and unwatchable just a year ago. They're in a much more fun spot, and I'm looking forward to this team and hopefully shattering this 28th ranking that we have for them heading into the 2025 NFL season. That's going to do it for today's deep dive. You guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your comments. You think I missed anything? And who do you think comes in with the 27th ranking? Really appreciate you guys for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out. Of course, make sure you're subscribed as well. And I will see you for the next deep dive. Peace out.